welcome to today's press briefing. I'm Donna Bush. As always, we're so glad that you could be here with us on our various channels, including on Radio Cayman. Well, today's press briefing is to provide a COVID-19 community update by our officials. We now welcome our panelists, our Premier, the Honourable Wayne Panton, Minister for Health and Wellness, the Honourable Sabrina Turner, and Minister for Tourism and Transport, the Honourable Kenneth Bryan. Also joining us in studio are Interim Chief Medical Officer Dr. Autilia Newton, government officials, civil servants, and of course the media. We hear first from our Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Donna, and I want to extend a very warm welcome to those of you who have joined us in the studio this afternoon, and those of you who have tuned in to YouTube and on the GIS channel, and I think on Radio Cayman as well, hopefully. This, I think, let's say we hope and pray, will be our last specific COVID-19 press briefing. After careful consideration of the local and international situations, along with guidance from our public health department and, of course, our Chief Medical Officer, Cabinet has been in the process today of approving further amendments to the control of COVID-19 travel regulations and the control and management of COVID-19 regulations. Those changes to those regulations are scheduled to come into effect on Wednesday, the 24th of August. Now, this is obviously following 2.5 years of COVID-19 related restrictions having been put in place. We're now satisfied that we can safely eliminate all but a few of the remaining public health measures. We have arrived at this decision, ladies and gentlemen, not because of economic pressures or anything like that. It is largely due in part to the experience with the prevalence of COVID-19 around the world, being on the decline, and very importantly, the high rate of vaccination in the Cayman Islands. This has been providing us with very substantial protection from severe illness and death with people, of course, who do contract the virus. Now, our success in managing COVID-19 and navigating the pandemic with relatively so few lives lost is really a testament to our willingness as a people, as a country, to work together for the greater good. Therefore, the changes to the regulations that I will outline shortly reflect a further continuation of our science-based, people-first approach to the pandemic as it exists in the Cayman Islands. Now, I want to give you a very brief overview of the changes. And firstly, all restrictions in respect of those traveling to or within the Cayman Islands have been removed. This means travelers are no longer required to apply for a travel declaration, will no longer, as of the 24th, be required to apply for a travel declaration, travel request, or show proof of vaccination upon arrival in the Cayman Islands. Secondly, there is no longer, or there will no longer be a requirement for people to test once they have completed their isolation period, having been found to be infected. However, all persons who have tested positive are required to isolate for a period of not less than 7 days. Thirdly, close contacts of people testing positive for COVID-19 can continue to work, attend school, given on the basis that they complete a daily lateral flow test and obviously obtain a negative result. To any people, any of our citizens who may not be comfortable with the relaxation of the restrictions, I want to reassure you that we are continuing to monitor the data, monitor the global trends, and will always, as we have done in the past, put the health of our community first. And if and I emphasize if, in the future, the fact pattern changes dramatically, if there's anything to suggest that we ought to, from a community health perspective, put in place any or re-implement any protocols, then we will do that, and we'll do that on the basis of the best available advice to us. We will continue to be responsive to the science, and we certainly thank the Public Health Department and, of course, as I mentioned earlier, our Chief Medical Officer for their ongoing advice, their support, their guidance, and all of that they have provided in the past to us. Now, whether you expect to be interacting with visitors or if you're taking that long-awaited vacation off island, I still encourage you to take the proper precautions, to practice the well-known now health and hygiene habits which can protect you from contracting COVID-19. These precautions are particularly important if you're going to be obviously in large crowds. Now, we encourage all persons who are able to do so to get vaccinated. We do have a high rate of vaccination, but certainly for those people who have not been vaccinated, we continue to encourage vaccination. It is one of the reasons we've had such a good result here in the Cayman Islands. If you are already vaccinated, if you've had your double doses, please consider getting the booster. If you've had the third booster, consider getting the fourth booster. They do work. Now, the CMO, Chief Medical Officer, will be speaking to this a little more later. Remember also to do your own personal lateral flow test if you plan to visit your elderly relatives or any elderly persons in the country or any other vulnerable persons. If you're positive, please isolate and report it to the Health Services Authority. I also want to emphasize that the changes announced today to the COVID-19 regs that are issued under the Public Health Act are only in respect of those specific public health regulations. Those changes do not relate to any of the provisions or requirements in respect of COVID-19 vaccinations which exist under the Immigration Transition Act and any regulations made thereunder. Now, as a country, as a government, of course, we have been under a significant amount of pressure from COVID, but government, certainly my colleagues and I, are absolutely dedicated to ensuring that we're bettering the lives of our people, no matter what it takes. And I know that for some people, the pace of change in terms of some of the regulations have not been as rapid, perhaps, as they would have liked. But rest assured, we are determined to ensure your safety. And it is with that in mind that we have been acting entirely through the arc of our experience with COVID. So, the people of the Cayman Islands, you have been on board with our strategy to rely on the COVID-19 vaccination, and together we have saved lives with that strategy. As I mentioned earlier, our death rate is very low because of that, and I thank those of you who have been vaccinated. Your participation and adherence to safety protocols as well is one of the contributing factors to our success. So thank all of you very much for working with us and reflecting that thoughtful, considerate, Cayman-kind spirit that we are known for. Ladies and gentlemen, our collective experience over the past 2.5 years provided us an unprecedented perspective and taught us several valuable lessons. We learned a lot about the systems to government, notably in healthcare and education, how to be flexible, how to make them work better. And we learned important lessons about our economy as well, and the industries which sustain our prosperity. We saw firsthand the stark income inequalities in our small population, the vulnerabilities of our lower and middle income Caymanians and lower income guest workers as well. But most importantly, we saw care and we experienced care, concern, and generosity for one another. We demonstrated strength and resilience across our communities in each of our 3 beautiful islands. We intend to fully utilize the lessons learned to plan more efficiently and effectively, and to test those plans, and to be that much more prepared for any future challenges that may come our way. Now, in conclusion, over the past few years, the citizens and residents of these islands, as I said, have been resilient, with our minds made up and showing a very significant sense of determination that we get through this pandemic. And that is very good for us in terms of any other challenges that we may experience as a country. Ultimately, it is up to all of us to do our part, to be responsible, and to enable and strive for the best outcome for our country. As a government, we are grateful to be putting, hopefully, fingers crossed, putting COVID-19 in the rear view mirror. I hope I don't come to regret saying that. And to be able to dedicate more of our time and attention in addressing some of the more complex and long-standing issues facing our communities, as well as pursuing the multiple good opportunities that exist before us. I want to say we are very fortunate, and I can provide perspective having come back just yesterday from a Caribbean Regional Heads of Government conference in the Bahamas. We are extremely fortunate in the Cayman Islands, this wonderful trio of gems that we have. And I would like people to remember that despite our problems, there are many that have many more problems that we do not have. So we, I think, can consider ourselves a blessed country. And though we face many challenges, there's no denying that, as I've said, we must protect our economy, our environment, and most importantly, our people. And this government, our government, is entirely committed to doing just that. Now I will turn the mic over to my colleague and Minister for Health and Wellness, the Honourable Sabrina Turner, who will outline some of the public health requirements in some more detail. And thank you very much again.
Honourable Premier, thank you. And as you alluded to, I am most honored and grateful to be here today in this sitting and being able to make these announcements and changes specifically to the COVID-19 travel regulations and to the COVID-19 control and management regulations that is scheduled to come into effect next week, Wednesday, the 24th of August. But understanding the importance and how far-reaching these regulations can go and affect the various industries is why is it important? It is important for us to be here, putting ourselves in this position and alerting and informing our public of what's to come. Now, the removal of the restrictions and the shortening of the regulations that was scheduled to expire the end of this month is based on the evidence of worldwide decline in COVID-19 prevalence, and our interim CMO, Dr. Autilia Newton, will go into those stats later on in this presentation. But with that, we are more than comfortable as your cabinet and as your Minister of Health with the constitutional responsibility to make this decision. Now, the control and management of COVID-19 regulations that will no longer remain in effect as of August 24th are as follows. There are no longer any restrictions on public gatherings, whether land or sea, indoors or outdoors. Now, mask wearing remains discretionary in churches and restaurants or bars. However, what remains will be mask wearing for persons visiting healthcare facilities, residential homes, places of detention, and prisons. And we'll get some more information under that under the COVID management regulations number 4 that is scheduled to expire then on the 24th of October or until, Cabinet decides whether or not that can be removed a little earlier. Now, restrictions around sporting activities, public transport, scuba diving, hookah, shisha pipes, boating, fishing, travel between the islands have been repealed in the proposed coming regulations. That means we have returned the responsibility to the people of the Cayman Islands and expect that each of us will remain cognizant, nevertheless, of COVID-19 as we perform in our day-to-day activities. Let me express how I am filled with a lot of emotion this afternoon as I sit here with you. First and foremost, allow me to humbly express my gratitude and the pride that I have in our public health team. Let me say that they have not wavered one bit in the face of this pandemic, and they have been able to face this pandemic head on. They are still out there testing and administering vaccines to keep our community safe. Just this morning, I observed the public health staff out at the Truman Bodden Sports Complex still continuing drive-through testing and I want to thank them for their consistent dedication and hard work. For that, I am truly grateful. Now, to our private healthcare partners for filling in the gaps and partnering with us when our teams simply could not manage the workload, I say thank you. To our community organizations who aided the persons displaced by COVID-19 in whatever way they could, again, thank you. And to each and every one of you, the people of these beautiful islands, thank you for your patience and compliance up until this point. I am confident that everyone in our community will continue to be aware of the infectious disease, and let me remind you to be mindful of all elements of your health as we continue to live our lives. This will include keeping our vaccine coverage updated. Now, as I stated earlier on, the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Newton, will share some information, stats especially, with us in just a few moments that will outline just how much vaccination, and particularly boosters, has prevented loss of life from COVID-19 right here in the Cayman Islands. Vaccination has been, and we have proven that, a key component in why we're able to sit here today and make these announcements of further relaxation in our regulations. I can personally recall the days of once being a member, probably just like yourselves, driving in our cars, sitting in the front of our TVs, watching them, and cutting even telephone calls short, wondering what was next. I can recall the fear that we felt of the unknown and the anxiety of life and the world, how the world has changed. But look, Cayman, look at where we are today. While this is indeed a moment that we must all share and be proud of, the fact that it is public health surveillance and monitoring will still be an important component in just being vigilant as we enter this new chapter, because COVID-19 is still considered a pandemic by WHO, and it is a notifiable disease. Therefore, I am appealing for persons to report any positive LFT. Report it to public health, and you can do this via explore.gov.ky. And as the Honorable Premier alluded to earlier on, the isolation period for all persons, whether or not you're vaccinated, will now be 7 days. So there's no distinction between vaxxed and unvaccinated person. The isolation period has now been, and what is being proposed is 7 days. So Confirmatory PCR testing by public health is strongly recommended, and we will be offering these PCRs free of charge to persons who test positive by LFT. The drive-through testing days will remain Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. until 10 a.m. And this will also serve to propose ensuring that we get the correct diagnosis by providing the genomic sequencing samples. Now, close contacts of persons who tested positive for COVID-19 can continue to work or attend school once they take daily LFTs over 7 days and remain at home if they find themselves with symptoms. Vaccination clinics are still currently being held at public health, and public health will ramp up their presence again ahead of the spike anticipated in the fall season. So I want to encourage you to get your booster and heed your public health non-medical protocols. And we intend to increase our messaging as it relates to non-medical, let's say, hand hygiene. We'll be getting out on the road and definitely promoting this as we make sure that it's important of us taking care of our physical and mental health. Now, this has been our key success thus far following the non-medical public health protocols, and I trust that we will continue to follow this methodology as we are able to maintain a state of normalcy. The bottom line and a key takeaway today is that it's better to be boosted. The lessons learned thus far have not made, trust me, the workload of the Ministry of Health and Wellness light. But I believe that we have risen and we have proven that we have risen to the occasion and will continue to do in our future planning. From securing one of the world's best infectious disease expert to serve as our Interim Chief Medical Officer, to being amongst the first countries in the world to achieve a high vaccination rate, now having a national epidemiologist to research and to guide us in our public health policy making. We have met many, many milestones since taking office. Of all of these emotions today that I feel, the one I feel most is blessed. Blessed to live in the most beautiful country in the world, our Cayman Islands. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the Prospect people for electing me, to the Honorable Premier for support and being supported by His Excellency the Governor for assenting me with the constitutional responsibility of being your Minister for Health, Wellness, and Home Affairs. I'm honored to be able to work with an energetic, supported group of persons in my Ministry of Health and Wellness, respecting each and every one of you and how you've shown resilience, dedication, standing strong, but standing strong together, and taking on every challenge with grace and executing on our day-to-day duties with top professionalism at all times. I'm also grateful that we did not fare out the way initial predictions of our country said we would. I am grateful that our COVID-19 related death toll remains amongst the lowest in the world. And I am also grateful to all the medical personnel, the policymakers, the essential workers, and the volunteers who led us through the most uncertain days to where we are now. Thank you for your time, and God bless these Cayman Islands as I turn this over to the Honorable Minister of Tourism and Transport, because I know with the relaxation of these, the positive impacts it will have on our tourism product. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, and she is exactly right. I am a very happy minister today. Good afternoon, Cayman, and a pleasant good evening and good afternoon to all of those who have joined us here in the studio, as well as those of you who are listening and watching online on YouTube and by the radio. It is a pleasure to be here, especially when there is some good news to share. Since the start of the pandemic over 2 years ago, the travel and tourism industry has looked forward to a day when the government could announce that travel restrictions for anyone traveling to or within the Cayman Islands have been removed. The day for that announcement is today, as you've heard from our Honourable Premier and our Honourable Minister of Health. As you've heard from the Honourable Premier and the Minister of Health, under the new regulations, which I'm going to repeat, you've heard before, as of the 24th of August, which is next week Wednesday, travelers are no longer required to apply for a certificate or declaration for travel to and from the Cayman Islands relating to COVID-19. They no longer have to be fully vaccinated prior to arriving in the Cayman Islands, nor will travelers have to quarantine or isolate upon arrival. Now, I'm going to focus mainly on the things related to travel in respect to tourism. This is not just good news for travelers, it is great news for the tourism industry, especially as we continue to recover and rebuild after years of COVID-related constraints. The new regulations are in keeping with the current global environment. As the Minister of Tourism, I'm in full support and welcome these changes. It was becoming increasingly clear that the restrictions on travel, particularly our stance on only accepting vaccinated travelers, was out of step with other countries around the world that had lifted their travel restrictions some time ago. Many of those countries, particularly the warm weather destinations in the Caribbean region, competes for the same tourism dollars that we work so hard to attract. The removal of our travel restrictions levels the playing field and it will present the Cayman Islands in a much more favorable light for visitors and improve our competitiveness. The lifting of these restrictions will translate into more business for service providers in the tourism industry and lead to increased economic activity and jobs for Caymanians. It also makes the processing of passengers through our border control areas faster and more efficient at our airports, which improves the traveler experience. And it is very important to me as Minister that they enjoy their time here in our wonderful home. Though we still have a ways to go before the industry fully returns to 2019 pre-pandemic levels, each time travel restrictions have been relaxed, there has been a corresponding increase in visitor arrivals. This occurred in November 2021 when the travel restrictions were first eased. It happened again in January 2022 when children and families were allowed to travel together. And we saw it once more in February when the mandate for LFTs 2, 5, and 7 testing on arrivals were removed. I'm optimistic that the discontinuation of COVID-related travel restrictions will lead to an influx of tourists who have longed to enjoy our beautiful beaches and warm Caymanian hospitality. But because of them being unvaccinated, they could not come to our home. Speaking of visitor arrivals, I'm very pleased to report that the Destination Performance Biannual Report has been finalized by my Department of Tourism and shows that in the first 6 months of the year, stayover arrivals have trended upwards, increasing month after month. Between January and June, our islands welcomed over 114,000 stayover visitors and 215,000 cruise passengers. The report is very comprehensive, and over the next couple of weeks, or I think we have some intentions of meeting with the media next week, we'll be making several media appearances to dive more deeply into those results. So look out for more announcements in the coming week. In the meantime, I would like to update the public on our airlift capacity, or better known as our airline seats to our country. The Department of Tourism has created a report that tracks airlift capacity and compares it to 2019 numbers, in much the same way that we compare stayover arrivals to our 2019 figures, because that was the last full year of tourism before the pandemic. And I'm happy to announce that the airlift report highlights that in the fourth quarter of this year, the Cayman Islands will have 1,253 more airline seats than we had in 2019. Basically, we can potentially have 1,200 more people visiting the Cayman Islands than we did in the fourth quarter of 2019. That's big news. That's 1% more than we had in 2019. This is very encouraging news, and it is a sign of the confidence of in our destination by international airlines. And it gives us reason to believe that we can look ahead to 2022 to 23 winter season, with some bright figures ahead. And I hope the money comes along with it, so my budget can be better. As I look forward to sharing the full slate of results with the public next week and digging much more deeply into the economic impact of tourism from the first half of this year. Before bringing my remarks to a close, I would like to extend many thanks and appreciation to my Director of Tourism, Ms. Rosa Harris, as well as to all of our tourism partners and stakeholders, including Cayman Airways, the Airports Authority, the Civil Aviation Authority, the Border Control Unit, and many others for their hard work and collaboration in increasing the number of airline seats to our country. And I hope it does translate to more visitors. As we are on the topic of aviation, in my final words today, I would like to announce that the Ministry and Department of Tourism have partnered with the International Air Transportation Association, better known as IATA, to host the 4th Caribbean Aviation Day here in the Cayman Islands on Wednesday, the 14th of September at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. This year's theme is Recover, Reconnect, Revive, and will bring ministers of tourism from across the Caribbean, senior executives, and experts from tourism and aviation industries together to discuss important issues such as multi-destinational tourism and aviation sustainability. I'm privileged to be the keynote speaker, and I will be joined by speakers which include our Honorable Christopher Saunders, our Deputy Premier, the Honorable Edmund Bartlett, Minister of Tourism from Jamaica, the Honorable Lisa Cummings, Minister of Tourism and International Transport from Barbados, Ms. Marla Dukerin, the well-known economist and leading advisor in the Caribbean, and many, many more. Registration for local businesses and residents have been greatly reduced from $150 to just US $50, which is only $40 CI, which includes refreshments and lunch. So I encourage everyone associated with or with interest in tourism, aviation, or any airline transportation sectors in particular to register. More information and a link to register can be found on the Ministry of Tourism's Facebook page. Space is limited, so please sign up as soon if you want to attend. Thank you, and I look forward to any questions from the media.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister Bryan, and to the rest of the panel. We're now going to call on the Interim Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Autilia Newton, for some remarks. Okay, you can go here.
Thank you very much. Honorable Premier, Honorable Minister of Health and Ministry of Tourism and Public in Cayman. I just want to confirm what the other speakers have already said, that the reason why these measures are being repealing is because there is evidence that supports the safety of the removing of the regulations. So basically, we know worldwide, according to WHO, that and specifically countries' surveillance, that the prevalence of the COVID is going down. We know the effects, the very positive effects of the protection from the vaccine, and we know that in Cayman we have a very good coverage, certainly for the first 2 doses, which allows us, looking at how is going in terms of hospital admission or deaths, which we know they are the very, it remains at a very low level, that we can now afford to remove these regulations. My message is that for anybody who is not vaccinated with the first and second dose, please do seek vaccination. And for everybody to seek the third dose, the booster. And then for the over 50s and those one of any age in the at-risk group, to seek a fourth dose. This was basically our insurance policy to make sure that we can continue to have very little negative effect from COVID. COVID is still around. It will remain around as any other of the respiratory viruses, but we are approaching it as now part of other respiratory viruses. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Very much, Dr. Newton. We appreciate that update. I'm now going to call on Reshma from the Compass for any questions.
Thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll start first with the tourism announcement. Minister Bryan or Premier, you can answer. These changes only relate to air arrivals. Are there any changes we can expect for cruise tourism? We do know that cruise ships are required to have the vaccination status declared and so forth. So what are the plans for cruise tourism?
Well, let me just say, I'll let the minister come in a second, but let me just say that I know somebody's going to ask this question, and you probably will. So I hope I'm not preempting you. But I really want to thank one particular department, a unit that will be affected by this. And I see you shaking. I know you're going to ask this question, right? So I am in a way preempting you. This is in relation to the Travel Cayman unit.
That's right.
I want to thank them very much for the dedication and the level of service that they have brought to our travel process. It has no doubt really significantly and positively improved the experience of our visitors and our own Caymanians, because I know from the numbers of calls that I get and the numbers of calls that my colleagues have received. But our announcement today affects them directly. And I want to say to all of them, because I'm pretty sure that they are listening, I want to say thank you very much for the dedication and the work that you all have put in. It has made a huge difference to the country. It's a massive contribution to the country. We have the chief officer from the ministry here who will no doubt, you go ahead and ask your question, and he can respond to that. But I wanted to say that up front. I know what the minister's response is going to be to the cruise answer, so I'll let him go ahead and do that. But I wanted to say that up front because I thought it was very important to make it very clear that we understand the impact that our decisions have, and that we wanted to thank specifically those people.
All right, thank you, Premier. I still have more.
You can come with it.
I want to join hands with the Honourable Premier, and I think I can safely say on behalf of the rest of my colleagues, the magnitude of thanks that we offer to the Travel Cayman unit, particularly that is headed up by Ms. Cassandra
Hibbert or
Morrison. She's done a great job. She actually came from the Department of Tourism and took up the mantle at a time when the country needed her and led a great group of Caymanians. So I want to especially highlight that along with the Premier. And I'm certain that the Chief Officer will respond. In respect to your question about cruise, I am happy to say that that these regs will address some of those concerns. I know that the Compass Media was continuously requesting concerns about the new changes to CDC and the cruise line policy FCCA and how it would affect the Cayman Islands. We were potentially could have, if we didn't make these changes, we could have possibly been on the verge of losing some percentage of persons who would not have been able to come off the ship when they arrived as their policy started to come in place, because they started to take a larger number of adult passengers who are not vaccinated. So, but thankfully that's not going to be a problem at all because their policy just came into play. The numbers of people who are already coming to the cruise line, coming to the Cayman Islands over the last week and up until Wednesday, they weren't affected by that change in policy because they were pre-bookings from before. So we won't have any negative effect at all, and these changes resolve that. And so interesting, I was going to put that in my speech, but I took it out. But you must have been reading my mind.
Probably. So, Mr. Howell, since the questions will relate to you, for Travel Cayman specifically, and thank you. Good afternoon. So, can you provide us with an update on what's going to happen with the Travel Cayman staff and how many will be impacted?
Thank you very much. And good evening, everyone. Good evening, Premier and Ministers. I'll join the Premier in saying a huge thank you for the Travel Cayman team. We were going back reminiscing that when they first started, we had little knowledge about the virus. We had no vaccines, and they were working on the front lines throughout all of that as we transitioned through our various stages of lockdown and reopening. So a huge thank you for that. Travel Cayman grew to a staff of over 120 at the highest point. Over the last few months, we've been losing some staff due to natural attrition, going on to full-time employment elsewhere, moving on to other opportunities. So the total staff now are 87. Just about 30% of those are on secondments with other government agencies as we reduce the staff numbers in office in response to the changes in the public health regulations. So we are now actively working to place the remaining staff members on secondment opportunities with the hopes that they'll continue on with long-term employment within other government agencies and maybe even within the private sector. The agencies that have received the Travel Cayman teams love them. They are polished with customer service. They have technology skills that are really transferable, and we look forward to having them gainfully employed elsewhere as we now transition to this fully reopened stage.
So does that timeline for the reassignment of the staff and career planning, is that going to be from next week Wednesday, or are you giving them a kind of grace period before?
So the current contracts are through to the end of September. If there are additional need within government, which we are in talks with agencies, including the DG and the Deputy Premier. If there are needs within government for their resources, then we'll go back and ask for funding from the folks at the head of the table there in relation to keeping them on through the year end in a view of transitioning them into long-term positions.
Okay, so in terms of how CBC is preparing, because of course, like the panel said, we can expect additional arrivals following this announcement. I can hear the keyboards now, people typing, looking for flights. So what's the plan for CBC to ensure that we have a smooth transition from the airport and onto the islands?
So the removal of the travel declaration, the travel request process would be welcomed by the CBC officers so that they'll stop those additional checks that they were doing. I'm happy to say that as of last week, the number of kiosks at the airport increased, doubled. So we're now up to 20. Those are now being tested that we're in what is usually our low season. Our arrival numbers for last month was 47,000. So international travelers. So that's quite a lot coming in. But those kiosks are envisioned to be a force multiplier for us with the CBC officers. And we're gearing up then for the high season, not just on arrivals, but also on imports. We're looking forward to that as well. There is a current batch of CBC officers in training, and it's perfect timing for them to transition into roles on the front lines as we hit our stride for high season.
All right. So, of course, with the announcement of the relaxation of the vaccination status and the requirement for the proof of vaccination status, I know, Premier, you said the changes don't relate to the work permit system, but is that something that is going to be considered by government, Mr. Howell or Premier, either one of you? Would that be any consideration for maybe later down the road to remove that requirement from the immigration transition law?
Yeah, it's not fair to ask the Chief Officer to respond on that. It is not something that we have considered at this point. Obviously, we are, as I said earlier, we are recognizing that the strategy that we employed in utilizing or relying on vaccinations has paid huge dividends for us as a country, and we, for the time being at the very least, intend to keep the vaccination provisions in place for people who are coming to our country to become long-term workers in the country. So I don't see that changing unless there's a significant change internationally in terms of the prevalence of COVID. So we'll see how that goes, and obviously we're going to rely on the advice of our Chief Medical Officer and the wider public health for anything that we do in this respect.
All right, thank you for that. I just have two more quick questions, if I could be allowed. And I'm not looking at Donna for that. But for the, in particular, with reference to the electricity assistance, I know, thank you, Mr. Howell, with the electricity assistance program that has been underway in government, through government and CUC, and of course, with the opening of borders, we expect that things are going to start rolling for those in the tourism industry, but there are still those within the community that are struggling. Is government considering extending that electricity assistance program and the pension holiday as well?
I think when we let me start with the end first. When we extended the pension holiday, we did so until September on the basis that we thought that would be a reasonable period of time in terms of the overlap and the restart and the acceleration of our tourism growth. Obviously, financial services has been very strong throughout, so it was really tourism that needed the continued support. I think what the Minister has indicated is that even without this announcement today, without this decision today, we already have airlift capacity that has been anticipated and put on by the airlines, which actually exceeds the 2019 capacity. So that's a very positive indication that our tourism product is very much in demand, and even with the current restrictions that don't expire until Wednesday, that capacity was anticipated. We did not indicate to them that we were going to lift to make any changes. So I think what that translates to for us is an even greater level of confidence that we are going to have an even better tourism experience and outcome over the high season and into the next year. And I think what that means overall is that the country is fast moving in a very positive direction, certainly in relation to those people who have been suffering from the blues that the lack of tourism has provided. Recognizing that it's really just been a year now, a little less than a year for us, where we've been moving into tourism, significant tourism growth, and restarting that. We are going to wait and see how things go. At the moment, when we put the electricity relief program in place, it was designed to cover the 3 months that are the highest consumption months. Sorry? The hot months. Yeah, because they're typically the hottest months. And what this means for us is that we'll see how this goes. It may well be that the world economic situation makes some adjustments. The reality, as we have indicated, is that, and as everybody knows, is we import inflation. We don't generate it here from our own monetary policy or otherwise. And there is an indication that there is a turning down. There's a reduction in the rate of increase in inflation. So it may be that in 2 or 3 months' time, circumstances are significantly different. We have a reduction or perhaps even a elimination of the rate of increase in inflation. And at the same time, we've got rapidly accelerating opportunities and income and people coming in. So we've got even better economic growth on the horizon. I think the last percentage that we reported on was the end of last year, which was it was at 1.8 then % economic growth for the country. I expect that to be higher at the next opportunity that it is reported, and with the kinds of indications that those metrics in terms of airlift indicate to us, and recognizing that the financial services industry is still strong, we don't anticipate anything but upward movement in terms of our economic growth. So that represents opportunities for our people, and if we can get the benefit of inflation getting under control internationally, then I think that puts us in a better position. So we're going to wait and see how it goes, and we very much hope that the best circumstances evolve, which help our people. But our jobs and our interest is to make sure that we do whatever we can to help people, to make their lives better, and to address issues that are of significant concern to them.
So, no, it's going to stay.
No,
the
I'm saying
deadline is going to stay.
We are going to, as it is now, it will remain. That's going to be the position, but we will
Okay.
keep it under review.
Okay.
You know, these are things that we have been working on. The current relief program, we were working on that from about 2 or 3 months ago, working with CUC and with Cayman Brac Power and Light, and they have been extremely helpful to us in facilitating this. So we've been very, very forward-looking in how we can help our people. At this point, we'll wait and see how the next couple of months look, and then if something is required, if some movement or action is required, then we'll consider that. Specifically on the pensions point, honestly, we have put a big dent in private pensions, and it is time for us to seriously consider how we move forward with that. And we don't want to start by just continuing to extend that holiday. Honestly, things have got to start to get back to normal. People have got to start to rebuild their pension accounts.
All right, thank you so much, Premier. I just have one question for the CMO, and that's it, please. This one is very important, trust me.
Trust you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'll leave some for Wendy. Sorry, Dr. Newton, just one quick question. We've seen that the Moderna vaccine has been approved, and that particular vaccine has proven effective against the variants. Will that be available in Cayman, and how soon?
Okay, so the studies which have just been concluded in the UK mostly, that's what I'm reporting on, do demonstrate that the bivalent Moderna vaccine, which has got the original Wuhan strain plus the BA1, I think, they so used as a booster, they have a slightly better effectiveness against the in terms of protection from the severe disease and from death. Having said that, also the original Pfizer and the AstraZeneca are effective. But yes, the Moderna seems to have a bit of an advantage in that sense against this circulating Omicron variant. We are waiting for the next delivery of the vaccine from the UK government. We are always very, very grateful about that. And we have just been told that we can have the Moderna alongside the Pfizer as if we wish. So we just have to say, how much we need of this or how much we need of that. Bearing in mind the Moderna will be recommended as a booster for the 18 onwards, and we will probably target the fourth dose for the over 50s and at-risk group. So yes, we should be receiving some Moderna alongside the Pfizer, which is still recommended for people for their first and second dose, for primary vaccination, and the pediatric Pfizer is the one recommended for the booster in the children.
Thank you so much, Dr. Newton. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Okay, I'm going to call now on Wendy from Cayman News Service. I believe she has some questions first for Dr. Newton.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, Wendy.
Just very quickly, just to clarify, so it will make more sense for the actual question, is reporting still mandatory?
Reporting of positive. Okay, let me explain. If you have symptoms, you are strongly encouraged to do an LFT. If the LFT comes up positive, please do report to the public health team at HSA so that a free PCR test is going to be made available to you to confirm that you are a case. And this because, remember, the COVID is a notifiable disease, and this is enshrined in law.
Right, so it is still, we are still supposed to report, because obviously the numbers have fallen dramatically of people that are actually formally reporting. So what I wanted to know was, because you all spoke about the data and monitoring it and everything, given the decline in the actual reporting, because people are obviously self-isolating, not bothering to report, not taking a PCR test, doing whatever. I'm not suggesting everybody's running around sneezing on each other, but that there is some, So in order for us to get the information and the data, have you got any other tools? Like, I know some countries, they test like the sewage, like to find out what the levels are. So how are we going to know if there's a lot more disease in the community than is being reported?
Okay, so what we continue to do is still some programs, programs of screening in specific settings which are most at risk, like, for example, the hospitals, or care homes. So where you still continue to test on a regular basis. In addition to that, we are trying to strengthen our system of surveillance, sentinel surveillance of respiratory viruses, which is very relevant, especially now that we're going towards at the end of the summer season, and we go through autumn. So those are sentinel places where people will report. So some GP practices and plus the accident and emergency, etc., where people will report to you on a regular basis and say, we have seen so many cases of people who have new respiratory symptoms this week. And then a subgroup of that will be tested. Not just for COVID, but also for other viruses. And this is the way you keep your information going. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, moving on. Minister for Happiness.
That's a good title. I like that. Minister for
Exactly,
Happiness.
yeah. So, floating piers.
Yes.
I don't know if you read the BED report, but they also spoke about it requires dredging. So did you chat with the Minister for Sustainable Development? Because it requires dredging the ocean.
Well, we haven't had a conversation to answer your question. I think that maybe your question is coming from my recent report, travels to Jamaica. And during that travels, it was not an intention to visit the Port Royal of Jamaica. But since the opportunity was there, We went to check it out. With what I saw, I was pleased with it. It didn't look like there was much environmental impact as per some environmental impacts you see with coastal works today. Obviously, I know this is a very sensitive area, but as Minister for Tourism, it's my obligation to look at all opportunities available for improvements to our cruise tourism product and value customers, but ensuring that whatever is investigated or I bring back to my team for consideration have the full analysis, hence the reason it's not been brought to caucus yet. Actually, we haven't had a caucus since my travels to Jamaica for us to have the discussion. I've asked my team to give me the full report on any investigations into the floating dock from the past administration so I can fully understand. From just preliminary discussions with the Director of Port Authority in Jamaica, it seemed minimal. Now, any kind of development on a coastline is going to have some effect, but I think it'd be unfair to compare it to what was being suggested before. Even if you were to have a floating buoy to have an anchored weight, there was going to be some level of impact on the environment. But I want the public to know that I am mindful of what the public's view is on the environment, particularly as a Minister of Tourism and how important that is, our environment is to our stakeholders who come here. But there's no reason to believe that anything is imminent. My job is to do my due diligence to investigate. There could be some new technology or engineering that could be presented that comes up tomorrow. My job as Minister to investigate. Now, if I find that it's too sensitive for the government's policy in respect to sustainability, and obviously I would speak to the Honourable Premier about that because he leads the charge in that area. And if collectively as a group we see that that's not what the people of the Cayman Islands want, then we're not going to go down that route. I think we should probably not overreact from my visit from a floating dock to suggest anything other than an investigation. And if anything comes from it, you'll hear it from our Honourable Premier in respect to the government's position.
Is there any pressure coming to you from the cruise lines? Because they've always put pressure on tourism.
At the last minister, you put pressure on, sweetheart. I can promise you that.
No, but I mean, are they
No,
still going,
there is.
we'd love a peer?
No, there isn't none.
No, okay.
Matter of fact, one of the first things that I did as minister in my meets with the Florida Caribbean Cruise Line Association, which the members are amazing, but I know that they have their own bias, they have their own goals and intentions. But we have been sent here by the good people of the Cayman Islands, particularly when on the topic of the environment and the protection of it, that should be our main focus. So I've made that clear from the outset that please don't bring that conversation up because it doesn't, the response may not be what you expect it to be. So they know that, but if there is engineering or options available for us to give our passengers, our customers that come here, a better experience, my job is to investigate, but that doesn't mean that we're going to go down that route if the findings are that they are damaging. So I think that would be the best place to leave that one.
Okay, just one more thing, because
Yeah.
it's still a long thing, and we're coming up to the high season for cruising. Obviously, the thing that you've talked about as a government is quality over quantity.
Yes.
So where are you with that, with those thoughts about how we're going to reduce the numbers and increase the high spend, if you like?
Well, this is probably the first time you're going to hear this from me, but as Minister of Tourism and understanding the industry a lot better than I did before, and understanding the stakeholders and how many Caymanians are in the business, it is important that whatever changes we make as a government, and me as minister in suggestion to my colleagues as government, don't have any negative impacts on Caymanian opportunities. So I know there is a position to reduce cruise tourism numbers, and naturally that offers the basic concept or viewpoint of what sustainability is, meaning less people in the various different environmental attractions that we have, like our beaches, like Stingray City, and so forth. But with any reduction in numbers, the economy surrounding the industry is built based upon the numbers that were available at the last given time in 2019. So if you reduce those numbers, somebody's going to negatively be affected. And that's not what we want. What we want to do is to ensure that the services and the enjoyment of our environment is good for the consumer, but also not negatively impact, a negative impact on the environment. So can we accomplish that goal without the negative of a reduction?
So as we assessed it, as Minister, and this is my preliminary assessment, but I want more details before I call this position. But as we assess the situation, one of the problems that we have is the disbursement of the numbers that we have. So for example, if you have 500 people at Stingray City, and that's too much right now, rather than saying, let's take 100 person visiting per day off, which is 20%, which causes a Caymanian from losing business, how about we diversify our tourism product and carry those extra 100 people somewhere else so it doesn't have a devastation on the environment of the Stingray City product, but at the same time, a Caymanian can make money. So right now, I've asked my team to say, what can we do to diversify our products better? And unfortunately, this information was not available to me before, because what I would have asked for is my colleagues to support me with a special fund of offering funding to entrepreneurs who want to try different products out in the eastern districts. So if we spread the business of what the numbers that we do have now across the island, it'll have a less impact on the environment and the experience. And that's what I'm trying to get at. But I won't be able to get or request those fundings probably until the next available budget, which won't come into effect until the first day of January 2024. So the good news, though, is that the cruise tourism is not back to where it once was in respect to numbers and pressures on the products that they use, whether that be the beaches or Stingray City or any other place. So that has a negative impact from monies that we get, but it also gives a still a breathing space for those environmental negative impacts that we were worried about until we find better solutions of diversification and spreading those numbers out. So ideally, I think there's going to be a little bit of a shift from minister to advise my colleagues about a reduction in numbers, still focusing on the quality, but not trying to reduce the numbers if we can find a better solution by pushing them in different areas and spreading the visitor numbers across the islands to have a lesser impact on the environment and traffic.
Okay.
Hopefully, I know that was a lot, and I know you weren't expecting that,
No, it's like-
but that's the truth of the situation.
Yeah. People are not going to be happy, but it's not. Our readers are going to go mental. But it's not like.
Well, Wendy, can I just add to that? I mean, I think in terms of the discussion, which I didn't hear the comments made in terms of the floating pier, but obviously I was in government in the past when this was an issue that was discussed and looked at in more detail. So I probably have more knowledge about this issue. But my colleague traveled to Jamaica, observed this facility there, and I took the comments that were, as I said, I didn't really hear them, but I took them just as an observation, perhaps, and speculation based on that observation. Perhaps curiosity. I mean,
Yeah.
I would put it at that. I mean, we haven't had the chance to have a conversation about it because I have been traveling as well, and so that's I put this no higher than that, and I think I at least have a very good understanding of what's involved with that, and yes, it's not as simple as it seems, and yes, it from my perspective and what I learned over the years in my past role. Having that sort of facility in a harbour which is open to the open ocean, it doesn't work very well. That aside, I wanted to just comment in relation to the approach with tourism. The minister has very clearly indicated that we are not at the stage of even coming close to the types of numbers that we had in the past. And I think a couple of things need to be reflected on. One is that we definitely do want to look at getting better value from cruise tourism, and that may in itself translate into lower numbers. But what we're talking about in concept in terms of lower numbers relates to what we experienced in 2019 and perhaps 2018, but also importantly what was projected as the desired numbers for the previously considered cruise port, which was somewhere in the region of about 2.4 million people.
Correct.
So there's a big difference between saying, we could live with 1.7 million visitors a year and get better value from that and offer better experience, and saying we're aiming for 2.4 million people. That's absolutely not our objective at all.
Okay. So next week is going to be a big week for tourism. We've got a hoop-de-dooping going on, foreign dignitaries coming. And we would normally have Miss Cayman Islands Miss Universe at the event. And I see that there's been no giving away the scholarships or the car or anything. Have you been consulted about the situation with the pageant queen? Because I understand it is a Ministry of Tourism thing and you give money to it. It's very controversial. Are you doing anything about that?
Thank you for the question, Wendy. And this is the first time publicly we've had the opportunity to talk about it. Since the crowning of Miss Cayman, I want to firstly say congratulations to the winner and to all the contestants who bravely took part in the pageant. It's not an easy task to be in the public domain, and as a politician, I know the experience. But I've just gotten an opportunity to speak with the committee and my ministry reps just yesterday to talk about the many concerns that have been raised. So I'm doing an assessment through my ministry and have further information to release to the public later on. But I want the public to know that I recognize the various number of concerns that have been highlighted. It is a delicate situation, but we'll have more information hopefully sometime next week for the public to share.
Talking about that conference, is there any reason why our own Civil Aviation Authority isn't listed to speak or take part?
No other reason than the dates of travel for the senior individual at CAA unfortunately had to go to another conference at the same time. And I am not the controlling decision maker as to the date, as it's a collaboration with the Cayman Islands Government through the Ministry of Tourism, the Caribbean Tourism Organization, which is members by all the Caribbean ministers, and IATA. So unfortunately, we wanted our reps, the senior reps from CAA to be the panelist discussions, but they had some other important regulatory conferences to go to in order to keep our airports open. But we do have some other panelists that will be taking that space to discuss anything in respect to the aviation matters for the Cayman Islands. But no intended reason to leave them out at all.
I was just curious. It just seemed odd. That was all.
Wendy, if we could take one more question.
Okay.
We really need to wrap it
I had
up.
one for Age for the first time for the Health Minister, and now I can't ask it. Sorry. It's another
Next time.
I've got just one final. It's kind of for both of you. It's another one. I'm sorry. You
It's
should
okay, man.
should never have gone on that Radio Cayman program. Developing, I can barely get it out. Developing in the central mangrove wetlands. You and the Minister for Finance spoke about that quite significantly, especially the big issue that environmentalists are really concerned about, which is that the road, not so much the road per se, I mean, obviously that's one thing in itself, but it's the access that it will give to this pristine, beautiful, critically important habitat. And you spoke quite clearly about you want to see people develop in there. I would imagine that the Ministry of Sustainability might not see it the same way. So I'm just wondering how you're going to be.
Well, I'll respond by saying this: we haven't had detailed discussions in respect to that, as it falls under the Minister for Roads. We also know that the Honourable Premier is in charge of the Department of Environment and Sustainability. I want us to also recognize that this is a government of independent members and independent thinking, one that we embrace, and I think that's why when anything that we announce comes out, it's so refined by robust discussion and conclusion that there's no automatic position on the matter. The road, East-West Arterial, is very important to many of the other issues that is facing this country, particularly that of housing and transportation. And personally, I believe that the road is important to being able to offer more land accessibility to the people of the Cayman Islands, for the future development of our country in many different ways. But what I don't want to get lost in this, Wendy, is, and I think this is a fault of probably myself and us as a government, is to understand that sustainability and protection of the environment does not have to stop the progression and progress and growth of, say, for instance, an east-west arterial, which we all know is important from many other factors like emergency access across the island. It's something that has been in the works for some time. So can we get this road done, and will we get this road done in a sustainable, environmentally friendly way? Yes, but it has to be done, and we have to balance this discussion and not see it as anti the environment or pro-protection, where part nothing pristine can't be touched. There's many engineering, there's so many smart people across the world who are working every day to come up with solutions to be able to allow these things to happen, but at the same time protect our environment. This is a government, this is the most protective government you will ever find in our political history that wants to protect the environment. But we do have some important matters that we have to address on behalf of the people that we were elected to serve. In housing and traffic and transportation is some key ones in our top 5. So we have to find that balance, and we got to do it quickly. We got 2 years and odd left, and it's one that we talk about quite often, and we're almost there in finding that best balance, hence the reason you see that there's a EIA out right now. It's something that all the members, elected members from the eastern districts is passionate about. I am from Georgetown. Most of my constituents are not troubled by the transport problem, but they are affected by the housing availability problem. And I do believe that East-West Arterial will offer up many options by improving or increasing the number of land availability, which is supply and demand concept. If you allow more land to become available, then the housing cost, I believe, will eventually go down. But that's my personal position. But I just want to recognize the difficulties and the delicacy of this conversation, but it's one that we have to deal with because it's important to a lot of people from different angles.
So you're comfortable with the development in the central mangrove wetlands then?
Let me answer for him. From my perspective, your suggestion in terms of what you imagine is correct. But this, I don't want to step on his toes, but the reality is that the road, and I do support getting the road done, but not for the reasons that you might think, and not for the reasons that some people might contemplate in terms of, particularly in terms of developing the central mangrove wetland. There is, the major factor is providing better access to the eastern districts, East End and North Side in particular, and providing that key route which is not subject to storm damage, not subject to road traffic accidents that may block off the road, and the access to the eastern districts for a lot of people. I've said in the past that I have experienced that myself, where I have been, I've had to go and stay somewhere else for 6 hours while a road traffic accident was being dealt with. But that road does not translate necessarily at all to meaning that that everything to the north of it, which is the central mangrove wetland, gets developed.
Great.
What it does do is it does make certain other developments on the south side of the road and particularly in the Frankstown area, perhaps a bit more feasible and accessible, because it provides easier access from that area into the western side of the island. But from my perspective, this is not a question of developing the central mangrove wetland areas. Obviously, some of that land is privately owned, and it is possible that someone could build a road and make an application, and we'll have to consider that. We'd have to deal with it. We'd probably have to end up having environmental impact assessments. But there's one thing that I think that we do need to reflect on, and that is, you know, and it is occurring more and more, and I have certainly had the benefit of spending time with colleagues, leaders of other Caribbean countries and nations, who have a very similar view to mine as well, which is that particularly sensitive land in mangrove forested areas do not just have a monetary development value. And in fact, it is not just the typical sort of existential value to the country in terms of you know, all the environmental benefits it provides. They actually have intrinsic value that other countries, other businesses around the world would actually pay to leave the land in its current state. So one of the very interesting things that is basically sweeping the Caribbean right now, and as you know, we have Prime Minister Motley in Barbados, who's a very strong advocate for the environment, very strong advocate for adaptation and sustainability, and also recognizes the benefits of carbon trading that we in the Caribbean have available to us. And we, the minister from the Bahamas, Prime Minister from the Bahamas, has just recently rolled out legislation which puts in place a platform for their blue carbon trading, which is seagrass, the value of seagrass beds. But they also have mangrove, and there is a clear recognition that has significant benefits, both in terms of our ecology and environment, but also that value that can be traded in terms of its ability to absorb carbon that other countries don't have. Seagrass, both mangrove forests and seagrass beds have orders of magnitude greater capacity to absorb carbon dioxide and store that than even rainforests do. So one of the very interesting things, and it's rapidly evolving, is that a lot of our land and a lot of our seagrass beds have inherent value being left alone in their current state, and they can generate income. They can generate income for people. So it's no longer just a question of what may have existed in the past, that someone has land that's mangrove forests, and in the past they may have thought of it as swamp land that they couldn't do anything with. Of course, we also have one challenge, that if you're going to develop that, you're going to have to fill it. That's another significant challenge. But there is a reality today that land has a significant value being left in its original state, where it is you don't have to sell the land to gain value from it. You can sell the services that the land or the mangrove forest or the seagrass beds provide. You can sell those services, and there are companies and countries that will buy those services and create income, and thereby create value for that land, which is beyond, you know, the what I would typically refer to as the existential value, which is the value that it provides to our country and our planet, in you know, generating the oxygen and doing the things that it does, which originally enabled enabled mankind to develop and grow.
Thank you.
But just before we close off that, Wendy, because I'm not sure if you're going to have another question to answer, but as within my growth as a representative and a minister, there's things that you learn and you grow with. And I am a Caymanian, and I have a part of my culture to say terms that may not necessarily be in agreement with everybody. And I inadvertently called you sweetheart earlier, apparently, and I've gotten many comments about that. So I do apologize, Ms. Ledger, and I will refer to you in every setting from now on as Ms. Ledger.
Mr. Happiness.
And it's just a matter of my cultural norms. And for anybody who feels uncomfortable with that, I will not say it again. Thank you.
Ms. Wendy, thank you.
Thank you.
Any final words from our panelists?
I just want to thank my colleagues for joining me here this afternoon. Obviously, this represents very good news for the country, for our tourism product as well, and for our everyday, convenience as Caymanians, because we're all subject to the same thing. And I have to fill out travel forms just like whenever we travel, we have to fill out the travel forms just like everybody else. So to get back to a sense of normalcy, of things being, the way they were, is a good feeling. But as I said earlier, we must remain cognizant, and as Minister has noted, we must remain cognizant of the risks, we should manage ourselves in a way that we protect ourselves. I want to say, and I said it during during my presentation, but the Cayman Islands is an absolutely wonderful country, and let me tell you, if people think that we have insurmountable problems or problems that make life very, very unbearable, I think they just haven't traveled enough. Mm-hmm. There are many, many other countries in the world that would love to have what we have. And I want to say that this country is one of the best managed countries, and it is still one of the, despite whatever problems we have, it is still one of the best countries to live, to work, to invest in, and just enjoy life. So with that, I want to say thank you very much.
Donna, I do have a few short comments. I'm going to steal your time to say happy birthday to Mr. Noel Williams, who is the chairman of the Liquor Licensing Board, Ms. Dorothy Bush, who is a representative of Georgetown North, Ms. Suzette Nelson, who is one of my constituents, and Ms. Joyce Ann Green, which is one of the constituents for the Honorable Minister of Health and Wellness. Also, I want to take this opportunity to thank the Chief Medical Officer for her guidance and assistance through this journey of dealing with COVID. It's not an easy task for advisors as well as government members to come to the best conclusions from an economic and health perspective for the people. And like the Premier said, this may be one of the last public press conferences about changes, because we're almost there, and hopefully nothing conspires against us and God continues to bless us. We won't need to have another press conference. So I just want to thank her for all of her assistance for this government. And lastly, as the Premier has just said, we got so much to be grateful for. And I think it's this time we should take an opportunity to thank God for the many blessings that we have. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. Mr. Turner?
One of the great things of being the last person to speak is that I say, as the Minister of Health, very little, but a lot more to come now that this is, and I hope and pray that this will be the final COVID press briefing, so that all that we have in store to roll out non-COVID related will be coming from the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Thank you again to my ministerial team, and definitely for the partnerships that we have forged in making our jurisdiction the safest place to be, for us to be at this juncture today, here and definitely abroad, which has yielded in us being able to retain some of the best knowledge and skill sets around the world. I give God thanks, and I thank people for trusting me in this ministry.
Okay. As always, thank you to you, the public, and as well as to the media, and to everyone here today, particularly our panelists who have shared some very important information with us. Remember, you can watch this entire press briefing on the Cayman Islands Government's YouTube channel on demand. Until next time, have a great weekend, everyone.